Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
Warning, this video has excessive amounts of decks that can be viewed as boring. If you find yourself falling asleep or yawning uncontrollably while watching this video, please contact your nearest physician immediately. You have been warned. What's up YouTube, Capital G here, and today we're looking at those decks that can be a serious struggle to play against. Not a struggle from the sense that they're hard to counter, but I mean you might struggle to stay awake when dueling against them. Yu-Gi-Oh is often considered to be a fun and exciting game. When you play against these decks, you might find yourself feeling the exact opposite of that. So I've decided to put together a list of the best resident sleeper decks in a video that I'm going to call the top 10 most boring decks to duel against the Yu-Gi-Oh hierarchy. Now just for clarification, I will not be including any FTK decks, as those would almost certainly fill up the entire list, and this is not entirely my opinion. Believe it or not, this list is actually made based on the views of hundreds of duelists. So if you see your favorite deck on here, don't be mad. I'm not saying that the deck is necessarily boring, but better yet, it's often boring for the player who sits across from you. With that being said, let us begin. Number 10, New Monarchs. Kicking off our list is a deck that I most recently played in real life, and after playing Monarchs for multiple weeks, I can say that the deck is pretty dull. Monarchs have multiple win conditions involving lockdown, and every single one of them is painfully boring to duel against, whether it's domain lockdown or the typical you shall not pass with Vanities or Majesty's Fiend. It's just not a very good time for your opponent. Number 9, Ritual Beast. So Wind Infernity making the list may come as a major shock to many of you. The monsters look very cool. They have a great lore involving the Duel Terminal 3. Hell, they even brought back the Contact Fusion, but that's all overshadowed by the sheer amount of searching that this deck does, which starts to border on obnoxious and can even rival Necros, despite the fact that it's almost entirely done with one monster. No one likes to have to wait through 8 minutes of a turn of their opponent searching 2 traps over and over again. Number 8, Tech Gen is Stun. So allow me to introduce to you Skill Drain the deck, because that's pretty much all that TG Stun is. Konami wanted Tech Genis to be a hyper fast synchro based deck, and they even gave the archetype multiple synchros, and when people played the deck as intended, they failed miserably. Then players started taking fun completely out of the equation by adding Skill Drain, and one of the stunniest decks was ever born. They often simplified the game into what I like to call caveman Yu-Gi-Oh, or me have big monster, me attack, me win. Honestly, I could have put Cleefort here, but at least Cleefort can OTK, so there's that. Number 7, Ghost Tricks. Now here's a prime example of a deck that metaphorically spends the entire game running from you, whether it's summoning monsters during your battle phase or constantly sitting on set monsters, which, I mean, they can't be attacked thanks to Ghost Trick Mansion. That's always fun. Hiding behind set monsters is perfectly fine when you have tangible offense. This can be seen with decks like Shadow and Yugioh, but with Ghost Tricks, it's more or less you're just stalling with no endgame. To this day, I don't even think Ghost Tricks themselves know what their win condition is, other than hoping that their opponent falls asleep from exhaustion and being declared the winner. Number 6, Psyframes. Remember everything that I just said about Ghost Tricks like 2 seconds ago? Well, about half of it applies to Psyframes as well. Now you may be asking, if Psyframes actually have lots of potential offense and they can easily win by summoning a flurry of huge synchro monsters, how on earth can they be ranked higher than Ghost Tricks? And the answer is simple. About 75% of what Psyframes actually do is completely based on their opponent making a corresponding action. I mean, it sounds fine, but in essence, this means that if the other player simply refuses to do anything, that Psyframes are also pretty much forced to do nothing themselves. Their deck's offense usually boils down to, at that point, a wind-up rabbit. Enough said. Number 5, Yang Zing. Much like Ritual Beast, Yang Zings have all the components of a cool and exciting deck. They've got breathtaking artwork, most notably Chao Feng, awesome and unique boss monsters. I mean, they've even got the ability to synchro summon on their opponent's turn, but the play style of the deck makes me want to stab myself in the eye every time that I have to face it. While newer versions of the deck are a lot faster and they're more aggressive, it still feels like the deck only plays when it wants to. Often at times, the deck feels like it's constantly walling up behind an endless army of floating monsters, which becomes even more endless thanks to cards like Yang Zing Path. This only amplifies stall tactics anymore. When you combine all of that with the fact that Yang Zings can incorporate almost every major floodgate in the game into the deck, it can feel like hours just getting through one game with Yang Zings. Number 4, Bergastama. So Bergastama easily could have made this list strictly on being an entire archetype of punk-ass traps that conveniently convert themselves into equally punk-ass monsters, but much like a good portion of this list, not only are Bergastama offensively challenged to say the least, I mean, 90% of the archetype has 1200 attack or less. What am I supposed to do with that? But this means essentially that they have to stall to have a legitimate chance of winning. I mean, stalling is literally written into their DNA as an archetype. Number 3, Amorphages. So many of you may not have had the pleasure of dealing with this deck yet because it simply isn't in the TCG yet. Well, let me tell you, I've played against it and it is one of the most painful experiences I've had in my entire life, and I've had my appendix burst. Amorphages are literally the embodiment of a floodgate. Graveyard, monster effect, summoning from the extra deck, check, check, check. They've got all your bases covered. Most people consider having to deal with a floodgate type deck fairly boring. Well, if that's the case, Konami has made a deck that is meant to put players into a boredom coma. Number 2, Noble Knights. I've been very outspoken on how much I despise playing against this deck, and I'm sure somebody will be very quick to point out, hey Cap, how can you hate Noble Knights so much and yet love Bujin so much, despite the fact that the decks fundamentally operate the same? And the reason is very simple. Both decks were most successful with the Protect the Castle playstyle, which usually involved Kaiser Coliseum, but at least with Bujins, you got to see some cool battle phase tricks with Crane and Siryu and those absolutely nutty Honest plus Susono Wu plays. With Noble Knights, you don't get any of this. I mean, it's literally summon board / Medrot and then turtle until you get 50,000 Noble Arms equipped swords onto your monster, and then you finally proceed to start playing Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, they even got their own Bujin Carnation and found a way to make that boring too. Honorable mentions include Sotelo Knights, Prophecy, and Bujins. Finally, to our number 1, Final Countdown. Some of you may not agree, but by principle alone, I had to have this deck at number 1. See, this deck is literally the biggest boredom offender of them all. Where other decks on this list will at least have the decency to kill you if possible, Final Countdown doesn't even have that option. It literally forces you to sit through 19 turns of stalling, while the player who's playing Final Countdown ignores every single thing that you do that doesn't involve them taking battle damage. Hell, they're even willing to play cards that let their opponent draw cards as long as they don't have to take any attacks in the process. There are a lot of stall decks in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the Stall King deck. So let me know what you guys thought of this list. Were there any decks that you find boring to play against? This wasn't a shot at these decks. These decks are, a lot of them are pretty cool, but I just felt like this was a good and interesting topic of debate. Leave that in the comment section below if I missed out on anything. Thank you for watching as always. Subscribing makes life happy.